Okay. All right. He will be on in right now. Wait, no, that's the other people. Oh, oh, that's a good shot. So what did everyone think? I think, hopefully, I'm thinking on the other ones we picked. I think this is the most intense one we're going to watch. I know this was a real up and down sort of roller coaster. So I think the rest of them will be not less meaningful, but definitely less intense. And Steven will be on in like 30 seconds, hopefully. And I will kick us off. I have like one question to start him with, and then we'll open it for whatever questions y'all have. All right. Hey, Steven, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I am good. Give me just 1 second. I can hear you, but I
Okay,
do not think the sound is broadcasting through the theater. You can see all the people in the theater right now. So give me 1 second to make sure that that is good, and then
great.
we will
Take your time.
get right into the questions. Yes, it, okay, I'm going to turn over to Sam for 2 seconds.
Okay.
Did the system did not do it in Zoom? There we go. Speaker Dolby.
Okay, let's try again. Okay, can you hear me now? Can everyone hear
I
Steven?
can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Stephen, we
Hello.
just finished watching your film. It was fabulous. I think I speak for everyone I say. It was, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I haven't seen it before. I knew a little bit about it, but I was basically going in blind, and it was incredible. And I know the audience probably has a lot of questions, but to kick us off, I would love if you could say just a little bit more about how you came across Sara's story, why you decided to adapt it into a film, and just the process of creating, this amazing piece of art that you came up with.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for all those kind words. I'm glad you enjoyed it, and I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for reaching out. It's a big component of the film. What was driving myself and my partners to make it was to share it with as many people as possible. There's obviously a wealth of these stories out there, but this one we felt was unique. The genesis of this film really came about through uh, my partner in my production company, a guy named Andy Trotter, and he's pretty heavily involved in a few foundations, charities centered around genocide and the Holocaust specifically. And he is a board member of the USC Shoah Foundation. And he is second generation. His parents are survivors as well. And he does some work over in Russia and Ukraine. And over the course of the past like 10 years, has brought a number of second generation survivors uh, to kind of over there to sort of retrace their parents' survivor stories. And there's a gentleman named Mickey Shapiro, whose mother is Sara Góralnik, uh, the main character in the film. And Andy took Mickey over there and did just that, retraced her steps, went to the village, in Ukraine that she hid in, went to the village that she was from. And after this trip, my partner Andy came back and said, I just had this incredible experience. This was sort of happening in real time. We would sort of go into these small shtetls and find the oldest person that was there, and ask them if they knew. They had a few pieces of information. Through Sara was still alive at this point. I should mention she passed away in 2018. But uh, basically, that story that he came back and told me ultimately turned into the film. I from there went to Detroit, where Sara was living and Mickey, her son, was living, and interviewed her and spent a few days with her. And as I mentioned, there's a number of Holocaust films that have been made, books that have been written, so much content that's out there. And I think anytime you enter into that space, the challenge is, how do you distinguish it? How do you tell a fresh perspective on this? And I did an enormous amount of research going into this. Watched pretty much every film that was out there, and had not seen something uh, that really sort of dealt with what Sara dealt with. It really doesn't deal with the camps. Obviously, she largely avoided the Holocaust per se by living on this farm, but her survival story was exceptional, and we just thought that it had to be told.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, it's very interesting to see the way you focus not only on her story of survival, but the extreme pressures everyone around her is also living under. And that's something, if we have time later, I would love to ask about, because I really appreciated the way that you did, portray the complexities of what the Ukrainians were living with and the partisans and, these other individuals who are not just Jewish victims. But I do want to give the audience a chance to ask all the questions they have. So does
Sure.
anybody have a question for Steven? We can start anywhere. And then shout it out and I'll repeat it back to him. Okay. Ayan? Yes.
I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the artistic film. There was a lot of symbolism, and the photography was gorgeous. But I do have a question about this New Year's holidays that they celebrated. Could you tell us what that is?
Sure.
Okay, Steven,
I heard the question. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah. It's called Malanka, and this is still celebrated to this day. And as I mentioned, I did an enormous amount of research going into this film, and actually watched a documentary, a Ukrainian documentary, that was a contemporary film, but it brought up the subject of Malanka. And um, they're basically carolers. A group of characters will go house to house, and one of the characters is a Jew, and is a stereotypical Jew. Obviously, you see with the affectations that we made of these masks, and the screenwriter and I, a gentleman named David Himmelstein, we had a pretty substantial history of Sarah's, the steps that she traced, and she was pretty lucid, and along with the 3 days that I had spent with her, she had given two testimonies, one to the USC Shoah Foundation and one to the United States Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. So there was a pretty firm basis of fact. But obviously, we knew that we weren't making a documentary, that we were making a dramatic film. So there were some holes that were in there, and David and I basically, intuited certain things. For example, if she was living with a Ukrainian family for 2.5 years, she would have passed Christmas, New Year's for 2 years, and they would have celebrated Malanka. And I remember calling him and saying, I just saw this documentary that was incredible, and it sort of deals with this holiday, Malanka. And I said, how remarkable would it be, that this young woman who has to hide her Jewish identity goes to a Malanka party and is actually, picked by the family to play the character of the Jew. So Sarah never mentioned that she attended a Malonka party. She never mentioned anything about them kind of putting her up to this. But she did uh, mention often, and I asked her often, did you think that Pavlo and Nadia were aware of your identity? And she never really she didn't give me concrete answers there. Sometimes she felt like they did. Sometimes she felt like they didn't. I personally believe that they put her through incredibly difficult tests early on when she first arrived at the farm, and then ultimately once they found out that she passed these tests and that she could pass as a Gentile and as a Ukrainian, an Orthodox. I felt like they got so close to her, and she ingratiated herself in the family. She became so invaluable, to them, and loved those two boys and they her. That at times I felt as though they may have turned the other cheek. And so I just thought that this was a very provocative scene to be able to place in the film that she gets chosen to play
Right.
this character.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is provocative, and I love and appreciate the way that you do, leave this ambiguity of do they know or do they not know? Because it's a film that doesn't have a ton of dialogue. I mean, it does have dialogue, but you're doing a lot with glances and who's looking at who at certain moments in time. And so I love how you do leave that ambiguity of what do they know just based on who's looking at who at different times. I think that's really interesting, and I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about those cinematic choices, of getting people to directing who is looking at who in each scene and what is that communicating potentially or not communicating.
Yes, well, thank you. I'm glad that you appreciated that. I should mention the entire film was made in Poland. We initially were going to make it in Ukraine. We did a number of research trips to Ukraine, went to the village that she was from and the village she hid in, and we had intended in filming in Ukraine. And then Crimea was annexed by the Russians, and while that was nowhere near where the region we were Western Ukraine. Crimea and everything that was happening was Eastern Ukraine. Um, we just felt as though it was not necessarily the most politically stable environment to make a film. Additionally, Poland has a wealth of talent in the film community there, much more so than Ukraine. Poland has a very rich history of filmmaking, and so we went to Poland and decided to make the whole film in Poland. Everything from the beginning to the end, to the music. I mean, I was uh, ostensibly the only American on the crew. Our writer was an American, but he didn't really come over. The producers were American, but they didn't really come over. And I was over there with a Polish crew. So I bring that up because I felt as though I was very influenced by Polish filmmaking and watched a lot of and Ukrainian films as well. And I love the gray area. I think that it's human nature to try and make things very black and white, especially when it comes to things like war. I remember being a young child, and my dad and I watched The Bridge Over the River Kwai, and I asked him, who are the bad guys and who are the good guys? And he said, there are no good guys and bad guys in war. Like it's not what it's about. And I was probably 10 years old. That didn't satisfy me, but it stuck with me. And you know, I can obviously Hitler was a bad guy. The Nazis were bad guys for sure. What they did was awful. But I always tried to kind of put myself in some of those situations. And the truth is you never know how we never know how we would react when it came down to these huge life or death choices. And I really tried to leave a lot of area for interpretation for the viewer, and not really spell things out so plainly black and white. So I hope
Well, that definitely comes through, and I think that it leaves a lot of space for discussion. Okay, we have several questions. Let's start with, oh wow, okay, maybe Dan and then Abe and then Kathy. Dan,
Does she return?
to Ukraine?
Yes, to the farm and the family and so.
Oh, that's a great question. Does she return?
No, she never did. She did say that Pavlo actually tracked her, came to Koretz, and tried to persuade her to come back and return as a nanny on the farm. But she did not accept that, and no, she never went back. She never went back as an adult. She had no desire to ever step foot there. And in fact, when her son Mickey went on this trip that I mentioned, she was very nervous about him even being there. They called her, in fact, from the town that she was in, and she was like, you guys, you need to keep a low profile. You can't attract too much attention over there. And she obviously went through unimaginable horrors and saw unimaginable horrors. So she was riddled with PTSD by the time I met her for sure. The first day that I interviewed her, it was in Detroit. It was the middle of July, so a big thunderstorm rolled in the afternoon, and there were these enormous crashes and cracks of thunder and lightning. And every time there was she would jump, and I just sort of noticed that obviously how could you go through an experience like that and not have it affect you the way that it affected her?
Yeah, great question. Thank you, Dan. Okay, I know the gentleman in the back in green. Yes, you, sir. I think you've been waiting for a second, so go ahead.
Well, I think, Stephen, I just wanted to compliment you on the film, but also you may have answered this question. I was curious if Sara had any additional contact with, say, the kids or the members of the family. It sounds as if she did not after she went on left this country.
Thank you very much. No, she did not, but we did. We learned that Pavlo and Nadia died in the 70s, and the little boys were indoctrinated into the Red Army and fought in Afghanistan, and in fact died in Afghanistan as well.
Wow.
Both of the boys. Then we learned that they had a daughter after the war, and because we worked with a genealogist over there who ultimately was able to find that there was a daughter that was born after the war, whose name was Manya, and I found that to be like incredibly telling. My partners didn't think it's Mary basically. This was a very common name, but they named her the same name that that Sara assumed, right, when working with her. And we found Manya, and I interviewed her, and she had no recollection of her parents mentioning anything about any Sara or Manya that worked for them, any nanny whatsoever. And I was very careful not to ask her leading questions. But ultimately, at the end, I said, and she didn't know, I should say, she didn't know that I was a Jewish American filmmaker, doing research of what we were hoping to make a film. But I asked her, did your parents tell you any stories about coming in contact with Jews? And she said, oh yes, I do remember. And I was like, what was it? She said, they said that the Jews stole our gold. And I was like, of course they did. That's exactly what, yeah. So that's it. She had no contact with them. When she left, got picked up by the Jeep in the Russian army and got back to Koretz, she completely, wanted to turn her back on that.
Right. Wow.
Thank you.
Okay, Abe, your question?
Was the story about the priest part of testimonial, or was that part of the problem?
Okay, did you catch that, Stephen?
I heard the question was about the priest, but I missed a little. Was it
part of her testimony? Did she talk about the priest, or was that embellished?
I will say intuitive as opposed to embellished, but
Okay.
it was based on a true character, based on a Ukrainian Orthodox priest who saved a number of Jews and was ultimately killed in one of these reprisal killings. And this was all, customary, for one German officer, 10 civilians killed. But same type of thing as what I was mentioning about Malanka. We knew the family every Sunday. Well, not Pavlo, but Nadia and the boys went to church. We knew that there must have been a priest, a Ukrainian Orthodox priest there. We knew that she must have taken communion. She must have to have done confession, and that was something that we intuited.
Well, it was
She
a
never mentioned it. Never mentioned that the sacrifice, ultimately the sacrifice that he made.
well, that's a great addition and very good question, Abe. I think Kathy had her hand up. Okay, same question. We did two with one stone. Okay,
Good.
who I saw a few other hands. Who else had a question? Okay, yes, you, sir.
Director, do you do the interview first, then you tell us the process how you put the movie together?
Okay, so his question was
I heard
about.
it. I heard it.
Oh,
Yeah,
never mind.
that one I got. So as I mentioned, this trip took place. I was called by my partner, my production company, and within a few weeks, I watched the testimonies that Sara had given to the Holocaust Museum in DC and the Shoah Foundation, and they were both about an hour and a half long, and they were both incredibly consistent. So I just, I watched them really in awe of her ability to kind of, recount some of these stories. And the fact that there were still holes left in her story. For example, Sara never mentioned to me that she was raped. She never mentioned that she slept with Pavlo. I had no idea that happened. But I'm going to sort of go back for a second. I watch, her testimonies. We hire a screenwriter, David Himmelstein. He and I go over to Ukraine. We do a research trip there, and we ultimately start constructing the screenplay. After about a year, we had a screenplay that we felt was quite strong, and we leaned on a number of historians here in Ukraine, in Poland. It was a very important thing for myself and my partners to have something that was historically accurate, because we knew, if you're making a film about the Holocaust and it has inaccuracies in it, kind of gives license to people who are deniers. And so we stuck to some very strict historical accuracies, but there's a gentleman that used to be the executive director of the Shoah Foundation named Steven Smith, who we leaned on heavily. He's no longer there, but he's an incredibly brilliant guy. And he was the one who conducted Sara's testimony with the Shoah Foundation. And he was heavily involved in a lot of the research and historical accuracy process that I mentioned in the screenplay. And once he kind of blessed it, we knew that so then we kind of went forward. That's when we went to Poland and engaged with all of the production staff and people over there. I was in Poland casting. We were still probably about 6 months away from the production starting. And he called me and said, Steve, I need to tell you something. There's a component to Sara's story that's not in the screenplay. I was a bit hesitant to even mention it, because she didn't mention it to me in the testimony. She waited until the cameras were off. But I think it's too important of a fact for you to leave out. If you're making a film about a young woman who's going through a survival story, which is something outside of Anne Frank's, we haven't seen that many stories of a young woman who's experienced this. He said, I feel like it's incredibly important to share the fact that, he said, overwhelmingly, at least 3/4 of the female survivors that I have interviewed were subject to rape or sexual abuse, obviously very common in any time of war. And he said that once the cameras were off, Sara said to me, she never used the word rape, but she said that, Pavlo she slept with Pavlo a few times. And he put it in the context of the goodbye scene where Sara says goodbye to her parents, all which is incredibly true to what happened. They were in the ghetto in Koretz, and they found out the night before the ghetto was to be liquidated. And they cast out Sara and her older brother, saying, "You need to leave." And the mother says to her, "You need to survive. Do whatever you can to survive, because your survival is our revenge." And that was sort of the context of how she mentioned it, that she did whatever it took to survive. And Steven said to me, "I think you should put this in the film." And I agreed with him, but I had to call her son and get his approval. I said, and he wasn't even aware of this. Obviously an incredibly sensitive subject to deal with. But I said, "Mickey, I think this is really important. I think we should portray this, and I promise you it's going to be done delicately. It does not need to be shown gratuitously." But that did in fact happen, and so we included it in the film, and it's something that's come up in a number of interviews and question and answers that I've done. But I hope I could bore you with all of the minutia of how the process goes about. But I feel like unless if there aren't any other questions, I'm happy to. But pretty much, once we got over to Poland and we're connected with a production company over there, and we're able to really access all the top talent in Poland and other countries as well. We knew we were in good hands, and we were able to kind of set off to make a good film.
Right. Well, that's a great example. We can definitely talk about it more if there's not other questions. But okay, wow, lots of hands. I saw you in the back have had your hand up for a while, so you go first.
Y'all put this story together. There are different audiences that you probably were thinking about aiming it at, I assume. Was part of that audience in Eastern Europe? And if so, how did they react to this story? I expect this room's going to have a reaction that might be different from that audience.
It's a great question. So we made the film for an American audience. That's why we chose to make it in English as opposed to Ukrainian. And because of that, because we cast, so again, because we really wanted to stay true to history and accurate, most of the native speakers of each of the languages, like all of the Germans were German, all of the Russians were Russian. They were flown in from Russia to Poland. The Germans were flown into Poland from Germany. But the main characters, Nadia and Pavlo, were Polish actors, very highly regarded, successful Polish actors. And as I mentioned, Poland has a very robust film industry. And because of the fact we cast Poles to play Ukrainians speaking English, it was a hard sell initially for I think a lot of audiences, and we didn't know if we were going to even get distribution in any Eastern European countries or in European countries. But the film was produced independently, which means it's done with private financing, and then it was sold into different markets. And because the film had I felt an international feel to it, sort of had a film feeling of a foreign film. I felt as though we should try to raise the profile of the film internationally before we tried to sell it into Hollywood, because no one in Hollywood, no one in the United States could identify any of the actors that were in there. Internationally, in Europe and Poland, some of those actors had cachet. So we initially started doing film festivals internationally, in Europe especially, and kind of grew it from there. And what we found was something that we were really surprised by. It was embraced by a younger audience and not that embraced by an older audience in Europe. Over here, it was embraced by an older, primarily Jewish American audience, but because of the way that the story was told, and again, I can't necessarily, I'm not trying to take credit for this because it just sort of surprised us, because it wasn't really, all of the Polish, all the Poles at this point, they learn about the history of the Holocaust. It's compulsory. They go in seventh grade. They all go to Auschwitz, and they have to. So they're aware of the Holocaust and what happened. But because it was sort of delicately told and wasn't beat over their heads, it was really embraced by a younger audience. The film premiered at a film festival in Italy that Francis Truffaut started, that's basically judged and juried by teens and from all around the world that fly in. And that's where we premiered the film, and it won an award there. And through kind of building some momentum internationally, then we brought it to the United States and sold it to a distributor in Hollywood. And they then did a theatrical distribution in the United States. Unfortunately, it was originally supposed to come out in June of 2020. Obviously, COVID hit, and the distributor put the film on the shelf. And they released it ultimately in July of 2022. And unfortunately, because again we I think had more primarily an older audience. Those audiences hadn't returned to the theaters yet by the summer of 2022. And outside of a few cities, New York, Los Angeles, South Florida, and Detroit, it didn't do very well. It was like in Chicago for a week, in Washington D.C. for a week, San Francisco for a week, but in L.A. and New York and South Florida and Detroit, it was in the theaters for about 6 weeks. So I hope that answers your question.
And it is now on streaming. So if you want to rewatch it with family and friends, it is there as well. I saw a bunch of hands on this side of the room. Okay, yes.
She passed away in 2013.
2018.
Did
Yeah.
she get to view the film?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
She did not. She was not aware that the film was being made, and that was not a choice of mine. That was a choice of her son's. Mickey felt that it would have been too disturbing for her to know that this film was being made. And along with suffering from PTSD, as I mentioned, when I met her, she had already, excuse me, been diagnosed with dementia. And while she was still lucid and cogent when I first met her and was able to, give pretty concrete interviews, over the course of the next 2 years until the film was made, she slipped, and she passed away right when we were finishing the editing on the film. So no, she never saw it. She did not know it. But her family, she had 3 sons, Mickey and his 2 brothers, and that last picture that's in the film is her progeny there. They all saw it, and they are obviously all aware of it. And I'll just add that was an incredibly stressful thing for me to enter into. Making a film. If you're making a Holocaust film, it's an incredibly delicate and difficult subject matter, obviously, but also about a real person. When you're in touch with the family, there was a lot of pressure there, and I will say that the family is incredibly proud of the film. Mickey likes to say, if he's done a number of these Q&As with me, and we have traveled all over the world doing film festivals, and he says, I was not looking to make a film about my mother. He was kind of like guilted into it by our other partner, but he says it's the greatest thing I've ever done, and he's so proud of it, that it happened.
Oh, I love that. It's wonderful. We should have had him on the Zoom too. We'll have
I
to like reprise it and
it
bring
would
him.
it would have we would have been like, waiting and then buffering, and he couldn't have figured out. This is much more efficient. Trust me. In person, he's great, but technology is not very good with it.
Okay, you know what? Noted.
Yeah.
Um, I believe there were a few more questions. I think I saw like maybe two more hands. Okay, yes, Jackson.
I wanted to ask about the decision to portray the dynamics between the husband and the wife, specifically their infidelity and also assault. I also wanted to ask, secondly, what the process was like of directing an actor, that character of someone who assaulted a woman who was a young woman who was tasked with protecting, but who also had the moral rectitude to protect her and to protect his family, and did have at least a degree of moral integrity, and how you approach that.
It's a really good question. I don't think I've ever been asked that question. So the testimonies that I mentioned that I watched, consistently, Sarah mentioned early on that the reason why shortly after arriving at the farm, she learned by Nadia that the reason why there was a job availability was because her husband had slept with the previous nanny and she threw the nanny out. She also mentioned that she learned pretty early on that Nadia was sleeping with Pavlo's nephew. So right there, that to me, that's where things kind of, I was like, this is too, this is incredible for this young child, on top of, having to conceal her own identity and the secret of that. She also has to conceal, the secrets of her employers. And when she mentioned that they at times would, open up to her and talk to her about these the infidelity that they wouldn't even necessarily talk about with their spouse. And I just thought, this is, how could a child deal with this? But again, back to what her mother told her, do whatever you need to do what you must in order to survive. So I think that answers the first part of your question. The second part of your question, the actor who plays Pavlo his name is Eric Lubos, and he is an incredibly accomplished character actor, leading man in Poland. He's kind of their like Harvey Keitel, and I went and saw him doing a stage play in Warsaw when I was casting that role, and I really like the gray area. Across the board in my life, I really like somebody who can be evil and you hate him and detest him, and then somebody who you also have empathy for and have some liking for. And I felt that Eric really embodied that. He's incredibly gruff guy, but also has a level of sensitivity to him. I should mention, this is my first narrative film. My background prior to this was mainly in documentaries. I always wanted to get in narrative film, but a couple of projects were about to happen and never did, and this was the one that everything kind of lined up. So I didn't have much experience in directing actors. I love actors. I've taken a number of years of acting classes and love the process of it. And most of my favorite directors who I've kind of studied, have all said that directing is really 90% casting. You cast the right actor, and you really don't need to direct that much. And I kind of approach my work like that across the board when I hired not only the actors, but the cinematographer and the editor and the composer and the costume designer and makeup and hair. I really I communicate in a very emotional language, and so when I would have these meetings with people, I would communicate what my vision was for the film, and as long as I felt as though they heard me and agreed with me, I gave an enormous amount of autonomy because I find that really elicits the best work in artists, and it's something
Right.
I love. I'm so turned on by that, and because as a director, you're constantly dealing with all of these people, heads of departments, and actors, and you really need to try to get the best out of everyone. So with Eric, we did a lot of rehearsals. Again, that's some of my favorite directors. Mentions they do a lot of rehearsals. So we did about 6 weeks of rehearsals, and the main actress Susanna, who played Sarah, was a complete amateur, had never acted before. We found her in an open casting call. And so I really wanted her to be able to have a lot of time with Eric and Michalina, who plays Nadia, who, despite being incredibly young, 24 years old when we made the film, was incredibly accomplished, had our big body of work already. And so we had a lot of conversations. Susanna was 15 years old when we made the film. Um, when I cast her, I had a lot of conversations not only with her but with her parents as well, because I wanted to make sure that they were supportive for what this ride that she was going to be going on. And obviously it deals with a lot of adult subject matter, but she understood it. We talked about this love triangle that I kind of I would always sort of mention, that this young child played these two adults in their fucked up marriage. Excuse my part of my French. So sorry, to answer your question, Eric, we talked about it. Obviously, it was a very sensitive subject there, but I think he and everyone that was involved appreciated the fact that it wasn't a gratuitous, you weren't going to see it.
Yeah, well, and I think such a great example of this that really stuck out, sort of out of all the things in the film for me, is how Pavlo is so horrified by his brother talking about raping and murdering this Jewish girl. And that was the point in the film, because there is a lot of like tension leading up to that, where you're thinking, oh, he's a creep, this is not going in a good direction. That was the moment in the film where I was like, okay, well, maybe she's safe, because he seems really horrified by the thought of sexual assault, and yet he's okay with what he's doing because it's not outright force, because it's more coercive. So it's a really interesting gray area. Like you said, it was great. Okay, I know we are getting pretty late, so let's have maybe one more question for Steven. You in the very back, if you would. Yes.
She had reflected on the danger that she had put that family in.
Oh, that's a great final question. Did you catch that?
No.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this was a question about, in her testimony, did she reflect on the danger that she put the family in, especially the two little boys who she got so close with?
She did. She talked a lot about how coincidental it was that she knew these rituals, that her best friend Manya Romanchuk, because at the time she went to a Ukrainian school, and when it was time for religious class, the Jewish children were dismissed and the Jewish boys would go to Talmud class, but the Jewish girls were not taught at that time, so they had nothing to do. The Ukrainian Orthodox kids stayed in the room, and the priest came in and taught them. And her friend Manya would urge her, stay. What are you going to do? You got nothing to do. Stay. Because they were such good friends. So because of that, she memorized all of these rituals and was able to recite the Lord's Prayer, and all these tests that they gave her early on were true. But I think that at that point, she knew that her parents were killed. She knew that her younger brothers were killed, and she really did try to follow her mom's instructions of surviving, because her survival was their revenge. So I think she was so focused on that, on surviving, and you know, the first thing I asked her when I met her, the first day, the first interview, I said, "How does a child survive? It's unbelievable to me, you know, how cunning you were, the choices that you were able to make. How did you survive that?" And she said immediately, "By listening and not talking." And I thought that that was really beautiful. I think too many people talk in this day and age and don't listen. I will obviously recognize I've been talking for 45 minutes straight, but yeah. So she only spoke when spoken to. She did not divulge information unless she was really pressed on it. So I think she was incredibly confident in her ability to pull it off, and um, didn't and also because where the farm was geographically located, they really you know the war really didn't visit the farm much at all, except for you know this
Right.
exception at the end.
Well, thank you for all of the questions. We have one more.
You're welcome.
Okay, we will do
Bring it
one
on.
more.
Bring it
Yes.
on.
Do you have any idea what happened to the original Manya? Friend?
No.
Oh.
I asked her that, and she never. I could never get an answer out of that. Koretz was an incredibly diverse town. I mean, it was there were 35,000 people living there prior to the war, 28,000 Jews. So it was predominantly Jewish. You know, it was a merchant city. They had, you know, a very robust market there. Um, so she was, you know, in the majority. There were about 10 Jews who survived after the war and went back. And Sarah ultimately ended up marrying one of the other survivors, Asa Shapiro. And they lived initially in a displaced persons camp in Germany after the war, and then immigrated to Detroit because Asa had an uncle who said, "Come, you know, the streets are paved with gold. You know, come to the United States, come to Detroit." Of course, they got there, and it was like awful. Nothing. But no, she did not. You know, I think she wanted to get out of Koretz as soon as possible. So I think she got back there. Uh, you know, met Asa, and then they went and lived in Germany at this DP camp for about a year and a half. And
Right.
Mickey, their son, was ultimately born there and then immigrated with them.
Oh, that's an interesting story as well. Okay, well, thank you everyone so much for your questions.
Thank you so much. Yeah, appreciate it.
And thank you, Steven, so much for zooming in, for answering all of our questions. I really
Very
enjoyed the
welcome.
film. Really enjoyed talking with you. Hopefully, you know, if you have more projects like this in the future, we would love to do something with you again.
Thank
But
you so much.
thank you. Have a wonderful
Appreciate
night.
it. Okay, have a good night. Take care.
Bye.